Hey everybody, hope you're all doing well. Today I'll be talking about a book I've been excited to talk about for a while. My final essay for my modernism course was on this book, so I wanted to get done with that essay first so I could talk a little bit about writing that as well as the actual book itself. Anyways, the novel in question is The Secret Agent by Joseph Conrad, an author I've never read before, novel I've obviously never read before, and I loved it. I will say this is a book I probably would have hated when I started this channel a year and a half ago, and I've been thinking a lot about that this week. Sort of how much my reading tastes have changed, how much I've grown as a writer, if I'm making the videos less fun because I'm trying to do these I'm overdoing the deep dives and talking less about just the experience of reading it. And that's part of why I was so excited for this book, because this was one where I really felt like I had both this sort of analytical side that was required because of the paper, but also I just loved reading this book. And the thing I will say, because I'm going to leave out pretty much a lot of spoilers, but in a way those spoilers and in turn the plot is actually irrelevant, and instead the writing style itself is what's important. I'm going to talk a little bit about that at the end when I talk about the essay, which is sort of contrasting D.H. Lawrence, who took a more philosophical approach, and Joseph Conrad, who made the writing itself his argument. But anyway, I want to read you the first paragraph to kind of give you a sense of what I'm talking about. Conrad is sort of referred to as an Impressionist writer. I've read a lot of stuff about this book, a lot of criticism about this book. I know that he had a few mental breakdowns and sort of abruptly switched his writing styles at different times. So not having read a lot of Conrad, I don't know what other novels of his looked like, but this one specifically is really focused on never giving you a clear sense of what is going on. And when I say the plot is irrelevant, I guess the point of the plot is to just show that everything is chaos. And then the writing itself is to sort of show how we're supposed to view that subjectively. Anyway, this first paragraph. So, Mr. Verloc, the main character, Mr. Verloc, going out in the morning, left his shop nominally in charge of his brother-in-law. It could be done because there was very little business at any time, and practically none at all before the evening. Mr. Verloc cared but little about his ostensible business, and moreover, his wife was in charge of his brother-in-law. Right? So take that first sentence. Mr. Verloc, going out in the morning, left his shop nominally in charge of his brother-in-law. And then we say, okay, it's not really his shop, and his brother-in-law is not really left in charge of it. Right? So that's the kind of thing that Conrad does. It reminds me a lot of, I'm reading Malloy by Samuel Beckett right now, and Beckett sort of makes that explicit, where he will describe something, and then he will say, actually, I'm not really sure if that's what was happening, or if that's what was whatever, right? The difference with Conrad is he sort of uses language to whir around that. He's not directly stating that this isn't what happened. You got to go back in that paragraph and think about what's actually being said, because the way he describes things, he uses language like we use it. And the fact that he's able to sort of say things that ostensibly make sense, but then actually they're sort of turning each other on their head, I think tell us a lot about how language is used in our everyday lives. Anyway, this book is about anarchists, basically, in London. And it's about anarchists who don't actually do anything. This takes place, it was written in 1906 or so. I'm not sure when it actually takes place. I do know it's based off an event that happened at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, which was a plan to blow up the Greenwich Observatory, which was essentially the place that the rest of the world relied on for keeping time. Now, Mr. Verloc is one of these anarchists. He has a shop, which is kind of like a front. We do know what the shop is, but it masquerades as something else, and then it actually masquerades as another thing on top of that. So there's multiple levels of disguises. The way that it's described to us, even, is pretty out of the ordinary. Instead of books, the shapes of books. Instead of cardboard boxes, it's vague piles of cardboard boxes. And there's sort of everything is in the shadows, and everything's murky, and you don't really know what's going on. The main characters in the book, I would say, are Mr. Verloc, his wife, Winnie, Mrs. Verloc, and his brother-in-law, Stevie. And those three are all mentioned in that first paragraph that I read. Essentially, Mr. Verloc, being like all the rest of the anarchists in this book, don't have the guts to actually do anything. They just sort of sit around talking about how things need to change and yada, yada, yada. And Mr. Verloc is essentially called out on that by this man who runs things. And throughout the book, there's several of these characters who are also anarchists. The most interesting of which is probably the professor, but there's also a man named Asipun, who sort of comes in at the end. Again, like for a character to become essentially not just fully developed, but entirely fully developed in the last 30 pages of a book, as in the case with Asipun, is so extraordinarily weird. And what Conrad does in this book is he messes with time. So achronological time, which is where you tell the story out of order, is something that he, as well as Maddox Ford, a good friend of his, were super interested in, belonging to this sort of, whether they would define it as that or not, Impressionist literature, which is really focused on responding to 19th century realism by saying, the way you describe reality is too simple. How do we actually perceive it? One of those things, and this is drawing on a quote from Maddox Ford, is like, oh, say you meet a guy, right? You have all these first impressions of him, what he's wearing, how he talks, this or that. Then he starts telling stories. Then you hear things about him from somebody else, right? So you're sort of, the way you actually form an impression is not chronological, it's achronological. It's a little weird when we're dealing with events from sort of a omniscient narrator, but I completely understand what he's going for, and sort of in the way that everything is described as a shadow and as a shape and as vague and all these things. The sort of movement across time is meant to replicate that. So this is all Conrad's view of how we actually perceive things in real time. I have to say I could not agree more. Like, this feels so much closer to reality than probably anything I've read. I know that a lot of the modernist aims are that. I haven't liked a lot of the modernist novels we've read. I've liked them. I haven't loved them. I really enjoyed this book. If you watch other videos, you know, like, my favorite literature is urban literature. It's literature that takes strolls through the streets of cities, and that's kind of how this hooked me off the bat, because the first 20 or so pages are basically just Mr. Verloc leaving his shop, taking this walk across London. The way he describes London is fascinating. There's even like series of mislabeled streets and things that are sort of almost like the way he perceives them as like intentionally designed to throw him off. I don't know how realistic what he's describing is for the time, but it's a wonderful picture, and it's beautiful, and it's like Conrad keeps all the essential parts of realism and then uses that sort of impressionist element to absurdify what it's like to be in. I mean, you know, he was very focused on sort of the absurdity of his own world. I mean, ours is 100 times that. So I think it's super pertinent literature. And again, like, I would never read a spy novel. Like that just doesn't sound like something that would interest me. But the plot is not important. If anything, I would say it's used to signify Conrad's aims. Mr. Verloc, when he's being told what he needs to do, these bosses are talking about, you know, there's no point in blowing up a church, there's no point in killing a head of state. These things can be easily explained with motives. The newspapers have ready-made phrases to put in their headlines and to put in their articles so that everybody's going to forget about these things in a couple days, etc., etc. And so the only way to create total chaos and total madness and really make people notice what's going on is to blow up the sacrosanct fetish of the 19th century, which is science. And that's why, right, they're trying to blow up science. Clearly, that is what Conrad is doing as well. He is responding to realism. He is responding to like scientific forms of inquiry, namely like Descartes, but also how that's used in literature. So naturalism, Zola. I even think that like one of the characters in here is almost like a stand-in to make fun of Zola. I won't get into all of that and any, like, I don't even have a real opinion on that sort of conflict, but I do love what he does with this novel. I'm going to read two passages from early on in the book that I really, really loved. And again, these are sort of merely descriptions of the city, but I actually think these are just as important as any major events that take place in the book. I guess one of the things that should be noted And I really don't want to get into what actually happens in the book because I really think people need to read this. And part of the fun that comes along with reading a novel that's very intensely focused on portraying reality is the kind of goofy stuff that happens. But Stevie, Mr. Verloc's brother-in-law, is mentally disabled. And Conrad almost uses that to make him a sort of purely good human that exists or is unable to exist in this world of self-interested madmen. And that's a really interesting conflict, and that's sort of what plays into the thick of the plot. But yeah, I won't get into that. Here's a few images that I thought were really interesting. Carriages went bowling by, mostly two-horse broughams, I don't know if I said that right, with here and there a Victoria with the skin of some wild beast inside, and a woman's face and hat emerging above the folded hood, and a peculiarly London sun against which nothing could be said except that it looked bloodshot, glorified all this by its stare. Right? So instead of saying this specific kind of carriage, we get, okay, mostly this kind of carriage, maybe this kind of carriage, with the skin of this nondescript beast inside. And instead of saying, women are inside, we're going to reference them by their hats and their hoods. And all of this is being watched by this sun that is distinctly London. And it's personified because it's staring and it's bloodshot, but also nothing can be said about it. It's just, there's so many interesting things moving. And then just a few lines later, Mr. Verloc was going westward through a town without shadows, in an atmosphere of powdered old gold. There were red, coppery gleams on the roofs of houses, on the corners of walls, on the panels of carriages, on the very coats of the horses, and on the broad back of Mr. Verloc's overcoat, where they produced a dull effect of rustiness. But Mr. Verloc was not in the least conscious of having got rusty. You can almost see like a Monet, like an Impressionist painting when you're hearing these things. It's all colors, it's all shadows. People disappear. There's this wonderful scene where he's describing this Italian restaurant, and the way that the people in the restaurant are described as having been made strictly for this restaurant. And then he's like, well, maybe the restaurant could have been made for them, but that seems more unlikely or whatever, which obviously it doesn't. But it's sort of a takedown of cosmopolitan ideas because Conrad notes that the cooking is fraudulent. A fraudulent cooking is the literal phrase he describes to talk about the food, right? Because when we think about what does Italian food look like in London versus America versus Italy versus, one part of Italy and then an hour's drive to another part of Italy. Like, what is Italian food? Same thing with all different kinds of food. Like, what happens when we try to take aspects of different cultures and put them into our own? It's all very, very fascinating, and I couldn't recommend this book more. The writing is wonderful. Again, it's definitely a very specific style, and I'm sure a lot of people would love this, a lot of people would hate this, a lot of people would be like, whatever, not my cup of tea. But if it all sounds interesting, I would recommend checking it out. I also want to talk a little bit about the essay I wrote to end this video, sort of contrasting Women in Love by D.H. Lawrence with this book. I have not posted that on Substack yet. I don't know if I will have before this video comes out. It's not the most coherent or best thing ever, but I had a lot of fun writing it and sort of changed my arguments a million times throughout. So that's where it gets kind of a little funky, but I also think it's interesting. And so if you're still not sure if you want to read the book, you can check that out. You can check out some other criticism on Conrad and different things that I think make some really interesting arguments for how or what he's doing and how he's doing it in this book. And I'll talk about that in just a second. Okay, so let's talk about Conrad and Lawrence. So the sources that I used for this essay were the two Penguin classic novels, and then a book called Conrad and Impressionism by John Peters. This is called The Resurrection of the Body, Touch in D.H. Lawrence. And this is called D.H. Lawrence and the Idea of the Novel. This one had a small section on Women in Love. The other two, I was mainly working with the ideas. I'm very interested, if you've read some of the fiction I posted, I'm very interested in perception, especially sensory perception. So finding this book, which was actually written by somebody who is an English professor at a pharmaceutical school, or like so like it combines like actual science with, it was super interesting. Anyway, the main point I want to get across here is, I've been at the University of Wisconsin for 4 years, and basically not until this past month have I taken advantage of the library here. I don't know why. Obviously, I'm sort of kept busy in terms of like novels and things with what I'm reading for school, but the amount of like it is so incredibly fascinating to just be able to walk into a library, find, whatever section in the stacks is Don DeLillo, right? You've got 3 rows of just Don DeLillo novels and criticism and all these different things. And I can just pull out a book and I can read interviews with Don DeLillo. I can read, very specific, an essay about how race works and white noise, about politics and the idea of, Don DeLillo being called a bad American citizen for writing Libra, and how the book itself responds to that criticism from a national newspaper. So it's just like, these things are so interesting, and it's not something I don't have the DeLillo book with me, but like this is a book on Zadie Smith. I can't read a Zadie Smith novel right now, although that's actually not true. I just checked out NW. But like being able to just pick this out and kind of think about these theories, how people are conceptualizing her work, and you begin to sort of make connections between different literary movements and different styles, and think about how your own fiction can sort of relate to that, and what goals you want to have when you're writing. Because I think, at least myself, like people tend to underestimate just how much a writer is trying to do with a thing. And so I think it's super cool to see people really dive into like what they think the writer's goals were, how effectively those are accomplished, what movements they think writers fit into. It's just like, this is totally not, I'm not writing anything on Zadie Smith. I'm not writing anything on Don DeLillo. Someday I'm sure I will, but it's almost like fun. And there's this essay I read on Substack, which I will link down below. It was called Research as Leisure Activity. And the subtitle was like, my favorite form of entertainment is downloading PDFs. And it's just like, yes. And it's so awesome because I've sort of found this like new avenue of things that it's like a break. It's like taking a break by reading an essay about modernism versus postmodernism and Zadie Smith, which just like sounds kind of utterly ridiculous, but I think the fact that it's not actually for anything makes it fun. And I'm on my phone less these past couple of weeks. Like, it's just been awesome. So I just want to say, like, check out criticism on your favorite authors. It is not as, not everybody's writing at a PhD level for PhD students only. Like, there's really cool stuff being written, and if you want recommendations, I can try and find stuff. Like, let me know in the comments. If you do read a lot of criticism, let me know how that sort of plays into your reading process and things like that. But anyway, this book on Conrad and Impressionism was really fascinating. And I guess I actually did talk about his style of writing earlier, but the main argument I ended up making, because I was kind of just writing and not knowing where I was going, which is kind of what I like to do. At the end, I'm always like, I wish I'd outlined, but I don't always know. The more evidence I pull, the more I don't know where stuff is going, and the more I might change course. So I actually find it interesting to sort of like try to outline after. And then if the outline doesn't make sense, then that's when you need to reorganize stuff. It can be tedious, of course, but I used to get so stressed about essays that I would just like write the thing and turn it in. And the quality of like the writing was probably fine, but the arguments never really made sense, because I was just like, I was so worked up about, if I do read it over and, edit it a bunch more, it's not going to be good. And then I'm just like, if I just turn it in, problem solved, second draft, minor grammatical edits, that's good enough with me. And so that was probably what I was doing like freshman, sophomore year. And it's just a lot more fun to, I guess just like be more confident, even though like not in a way I don't actually think the essay is very good. It's just like, I'm interested and less stressed and all those things. I talked about D.H. Lawrence on here, and I really liked parts of this book. And the thing that I didn't notice while I was reading it, that I noticed from reading this stuff and also just contrasting it with Conrad, is how he creates an absurd environment, but does so by like over describing things. It's like he will describe clothes or gold or something so closely and meticulously that it begins to be absurd, kind of like reading a word over and over and over again until it's like, that's not even a word, that like, what am I looking at? He goes very far into consciousness, but his argument sort of becomes, we need more of that. Go even deeper into consciousness. And the thing that I think it's this book, the statement this book kind of makes is that Lawrence is just sort of arguing that people are out of touch with their environment, which is the same thing Conrad is saying. But his solution is that people need to sort of elevate their consciousness to a higher realm and need to find this sort of more unified world, one in which they are in touch with the world around them, one in which they are more in touch with their body. And he sort of uses absurdist description and extreme sense of perception and sensory touch to accomplish that. The arguments he makes against how his characters exist in the world are like through those characters' dialogues. And so there's a lot of really interesting dialogues, essentially like philosophical debates. So the thing that's said, and something that like Peter says in his Impressionist thing, is he actually mentions Lawrence, and he says, you know, Lawrence is a philosophical novelist. Conrad had no philosophy of art. He then goes on to say Conrad's Impressionist style is meant to emphasize the absurdity of a Western world that is so focused on knowing everything, and in which really nothing is certain and everything is subjective. I would say that's a philosophy. So again, he made both those points, right? So it kind of cancels out in my mind. But I do think that he's making an argument through the way he writes, through his writing style, through aesthetics, whereas Lawrence is making an argument with his ideas and with ideas that contrast his aesthetics. So it's really interesting in that way. And that's all I was trying to get at in the essay, was look at sort of different, and you know what, I'm going to post it now just for the heck of it, because why not, is try and look at different lenses of criticism and sort of combine them and kind of agree and kind of disagree. And it's not like, it's just sort of an exercise. I'm not adding anything new to the argument or whatever. But I just thought it was so fun. And to be able to like have a lot of fun, even with a book that I didn't necessarily love. Again, liked parts of it, but it was a little too long for me, a little too tedious, a little too repetitive. To be able to have fun with that was really cool. So anyway, I hope this video was entertaining. I hope it wasn't too long. I, again, will link that Substack essay that I read below. I'll link my Substack where I'm going to post the essay that I wrote. And I have a lot more books to discuss with you guys soon. I will not take, 20 or 30 minutes or whatever I took here to discuss one book from now on. But I really did love this. If you've read Conrad before, especially, Secret Agent, let me know what you think. Other books, let me know what you'd recommend. I hope you're all doing really fantastic. Happy reading. I'll see you soon. Peace.